My name is Claire Morrison, and I was 28 years old the day I signed the trust papers that would eventually tear my family apart. To anyone on the outside, my grandparents, Harold and June Morrison, were the picture of a quiet, well-off American couple. They lived in a colonial-style house on the outskirts of Hartford, Connecticut, white siding, blue shutters, a garden full of rose bushes that my grandmother tended with the same discipline she applied to her grandchildren's manners. My grandfather had made his money decades ago in real estate. He was sharp, cautious, and almost painfully private about his finances. Growing up, their home was the one place that always felt stable. My parents' marriage had collapsed when I was 12, and my father, their only son, hadn't exactly handled divorce gracefully. He moved 3 towns over with his new girlfriend and stopped showing up for birthdays. My mother tried to keep us together, but by the time I was in college, I was the only one still making the Sunday visits to Grandma and Grandpa's. They adored me, and I adored them. I remember sitting in their sunroom, drinking my grandmother's iced tea while Grandpa watched the evening news. We'd talk about everything: school, work, the world. He once told me, "Money doesn't change people, Claire. It only makes them louder about who they really are." I didn't realize how true that would become until he passed. He died quietly in his sleep, just after his 85th birthday. Peaceful, they said. But peace doesn't linger long in a family that smells inheritance. The day after his funeral, the vultures arrived, not with feathers, but with smiles and casserole dishes. My father came, pretending to comfort my grandmother, though I could see his eyes scanning the walls, the furniture, the paintings. My 2 uncles, men who hadn't visited in years, started dropping hints about helping with the house or keeping things organized. My aunt, Cheryl, who had built her identity on gossip, began whispering about what Grandpa must have left behind. I remember standing in the kitchen washing dishes when I overheard her talking to my father. He had at least $3 million in assets, right? Between the house, the land, the investments. June can't handle all that herself. My father's voice dropped low. "Don't worry, Cheryl. I'll make sure it's handled properly." Those were the words that made my stomach twist. Handled properly. I knew exactly what that meant. At that point, my grandmother was 82, her memory starting to slip in and out like a flickering light. She'd forget what day it was, or where she'd left her glasses. But she still remembered my name every time. She trusted me. And I couldn't shake the feeling that my family was waiting for her to forget more than just her glasses. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing things. My father showing up with paperwork for Grandma to sign. My uncle mentioning something about liquidating property before taxes hit. My aunt visiting with a financial advisor I'd never met. When I asked Grandma what she was signing, she just smiled faintly. "Oh, it's nothing, dear. Just some updates your father said we needed to make." The dread in my gut wouldn't go away. So one afternoon, while she was napping, I called my friend Daniel, who worked at a small law firm downtown. We'd gone to college together. He specialized in estate management. I told him everything.
He was quiet for a long time.
Then he said, "Claire, if what you're saying is true, your dad could be moving her assets into his control before she even realizes it. You need to protect her legally, fast." "Protect her how?" I asked. "By putting the estate into a trust," he said. "If she agrees, it gives her control while she's alive and ensures her wishes can't be altered later by anyone else." I hesitated. "But my family will hate it," he said bluntly. "But if you're right about their intentions, that's the only way to keep her safe." That night, I sat at Grandma's bedside with the hum of her oxygen machine filling the silence. I told her what I'd heard, what I feared. I expected her to brush it off, but she didn't. Instead, she sighed, long and tired. "I know what they're doing, sweetheart," she whispered. "Your grandfather warned me before he died. He said, 'June, when I go, they'll come for what's left. Trust Claire.'" I froze. "He said that?" She nodded. "You're the only one who still listens." Tears welled in my eyes. "Grandma, do you want me to protect the estate?" She reached for my hand. "Do what needs to be done." The next day, Daniel helped me set up a legal trust, the Morrison Family Preservation Trust. The documents were clear. Ownership of the home, the land, and the investment accounts would transfer into the trust under her name, with me as trustee. She would remain beneficiary until her death, after which the estate would be distributed according to her written will, untouched by anyone else. It was airtight, legal, honest.
But the family wouldn't see it that way.
When I sat beside Grandma as she signed the papers, she was calm,
Steady.
but my hand trembled. I knew that one signature could destroy every remaining thread of family harmony. Still, I did it. I notarized the document, filed it, and tucked the copies in a locked drawer at my apartment. That was 20 months ago. For a while, it worked. My father stopped bringing papers. My uncles lost interest when the lawyers began requesting authorizations they didn't have. My aunt started whispering again, of course, but gossip couldn't pierce a legal shield. I thought it was over. But I was wrong. Because when Grandma died last month, and the will was finally read, all hell broke loose. I was sitting in the attorney's office, still wearing the black dress I'd worn to her funeral, when the document was opened. The lawyer, an older man with thin silver glasses, cleared his throat. Mrs. June Morrison leaves the following to her heirs. The room went silent as he began reading. The house, the land, the savings, all under the Morrison Family Preservation Trust. And then the line that changed everything. My granddaughter, Claire Morrison, is to serve as trustee and executor of this estate until its full distribution according to my wishes. My father's jaw tightened. My aunt gasped audibly. What? My uncle barked. That's not possible. I handled those accounts. I stayed silent, staring at the floor. The lawyer continued reading. But I didn't hear the rest, just the sound of my father's pen clicking nervously, over and over, like a ticking bomb. When the meeting ended, he pulled me aside in the hallway. His voice was low and venomous. What did you do, Claire? I followed Grandma's wishes, I said quietly. His eyes narrowed. You manipulated her. No, I said. I protected her. He leaned in closer, his breath sharp. You have no idea what you've started. Then he walked out, leaving me standing in the cold corridor, my heart pounding so loudly it drowned out everything else. That was 3 weeks ago. And since then, my phone hasn't stopped ringing. Calls from relatives, threats, demands, messages saying I've ruined everything. But deep down, I knew I did the right thing. Still, I couldn't shake the unease. Because when people lose money or think they have, they don't just get angry. They get dangerous. And I was about to find out just how far my family would go to get it back. 3 days after the will reading, the first letter arrived. A thick white envelope, no return address, just my name in capital letters typed. I tore it open expecting condolences, but instead, it was a legal notice. Notice of intent to contest trust establishment. Below it, my father's name. I remember sitting at my kitchen counter, my coffee growing cold as I read the words over and over. Contest the trust? On what grounds? My phone rang seconds later. It was him. Did you get it? He asked. I did. Good, he said flatly. Then you know I'm not playing games. You took what wasn't yours, Claire. I took a deep breath. It wasn't mine. It was Grandma's. And she asked me to protect it. He laughed bitterly. Protect it? You locked up the estate, so tight none of us can touch a dime. Do you realize what you've done? That money was meant for all of us, your uncles, your cousins, me. Meant. I cut in. According to who? He went quiet. I continued, my voice trembling. You never cared about her wishes when she was alive, Dad. Now suddenly you want to be the keeper of her memory. For a moment, I thought he'd hang up. But instead his tone turned icy. You think you're some kind of hero, he said. But trust me, Claire, you're not ready for what happens next. Then he hung up. For the next few days, I barely slept. My inbox filled with messages from relatives, some angry, some manipulative. My Aunt Cheryl wrote, Sweetheart, I know your dad can be tough, but maybe you could just release some of the funds. You don't want the family turning on you. My cousin Mark, who hadn't texted me in 5 years, suddenly wanted to grab coffee. And my Uncle Alan left a voicemail saying, "Claire, lawyers are expensive. Drop the trust before it ruins your reputation." It was surreal, like watching the people you grew up with turn into strangers overnight. I finally called Daniel, my lawyer friend, and told him everything. He wasn't surprised. "I figured this would happen," he said. "But don't panic. A trust like yours can only be contested if there's evidence of fraud, coercion, or mental incapacity. Did your grandmother sign willingly?" "She did," I said firmly. "We even had it notarized." "Then you're safe," he said. "Legally, you're in the clear. Morally, that's another story." He wasn't wrong. The legal part was easy. It was the emotional war that kept me awake at night. Every family group chat went silent. I stopped getting invitations to gatherings. Even my mom, who had always stayed neutral after the divorce, started distancing herself. "Claire," she said gently one evening when I called, "maybe you could just talk to your dad. Try to find middle ground." "There's no middle ground, Mom," I said. "Either Grandma's wishes stand or they don't." She sighed. "I know. But you know how your father is. When he feels cornered, he doesn't think rationally." I rubbed my temples. "He's not thinking about her legacy. He's thinking about control." Mom was quiet for a while. Then she whispered, "Be careful, honey. I know him better than anyone. When he loses control, he gets vindictive." 2 weeks later, I found out what she meant. I came home from work one evening to find my front door slightly open. My stomach dropped. I pushed it carefully, calling out, "Hello?" Nothing. The apartment looked mostly normal, but my desk drawers were open. The lockbox where I kept the notarized trust documents had been forced open. The documents were gone. I stood there frozen, my pulse thundering. Then I noticed something else, a faint smell of my father's cologne. The same one he'd worn at the funeral. I called the police. They came, took photos, asked questions, filed a report. But without a witness or fingerprints, it was just another possible family dispute. I knew better. The next morning, I called Daniel in panic. "They took the original documents," I said. He didn't miss a beat. "We still have electronic copies filed with the court and my office." "But Claire, this isn't about the papers anymore. This is about intimidation." I sat down, shaking. "He wouldn't really hurt me, would he?" Daniel hesitated. "I don't think so. But I do think he's desperate. And desperate people make reckless choices." By the end of that month, the court summons came through. My father and uncle were suing me for undue influence. They claimed I manipulated my grandmother into signing the trust while she was mentally declining. The irony nearly made me laugh, except I wanted to scream. I had spent years protecting that woman, visiting her when no one else did. And now they were painting me as some conniving granddaughter scheming for money. My court date was set for late September. For weeks, I lived in a fog of anxiety. I avoided social media, ignored calls, buried myself in work. But one night, as I was preparing evidence, I came across something I hadn't noticed before, a folder buried in my grandmother's old documents labeled Estate Notes, Confidential. Inside were pages of her handwriting, shaky but legible. Notes detailing every conversation she'd had with my father and uncles about her finances. Dates, times, even phrases. March 14th, Alan suggested I sell property before taxes. Felt uncomfortable. April 2nd, Robert, my father, brought over new documents. Said I should sign them. Did not understand them. Felt pressured. May 10th, told Claire I trust her more than anyone. I froze, tears spilling over as I read her words. It was the proof I hadn't realized I needed. She knew. Every instinct I'd followed had been justified. I scanned the pages and sent copies to Daniel immediately. His reply came within minutes. "This changes everything. They don't have a case anymore." The court hearing was tense. My father avoided my eyes the whole time. My uncle sat beside him, red-faced and whispering angrily into his ear. When the judge reviewed the documents, she raised her brows. So, the decedent documented her own concerns about coercion before the trust was even created? Daniel stood confidently. "Yes, Your Honor. These are contemporaneous notes written by Mrs. Morrison in her own hand, verified by handwriting analysis. They show she acted knowingly and freely. The judge nodded slowly. That's substantial. My father's lawyer scrambled, trying to argue that my grandmother's handwriting was inconsistent. But the judge wasn't buying it. Finally, after 2 long hours, she looked at my father and said, "Mr. Morrison, your case lacks credible evidence. I'm dismissing this suit with prejudice." It was over. I sat there numb as my father's shoulders slumped. The courtroom emptied, and he finally turned to look at me. For a brief moment, I saw something flicker in his eyes, shame, maybe,
Or loss.
but he didn't say a word. He just walked out. Outside, the autumn air felt sharper, lighter. Daniel clapped me on the shoulder. "You did it, Claire. You protected her." I smiled faintly. "Yeah, but it doesn't feel like winning." He nodded. "It rarely does. But you honored her trust. That's more than most families can say." That night, I went home, poured myself a glass of wine, and sat on the balcony watching the city lights. For the first time in months, the tension in my chest eased. But as I scrolled through my phone, I noticed a new voicemail from an unknown number. When I played it, my blood ran cold. A man's voice, muffled, low, unmistakable, my father's. "You think this is over, Claire? You think you won? That house, that land, it's ours. You can hide behind your little trust, but you can't hide forever." The message ended with silence. I sat there gripping my phone, my heart pounding in my throat. For a moment, I wanted to call Daniel again, or maybe even the police. But instead, I took a deep breath, walked to my desk, and opened the drawer where I kept a sealed envelope, one my grandmother had handed me the week before she passed. She'd said, "If they ever come for you, use this." I had never opened it.
Until now.
Inside was a single sheet of paper, handwritten, dated, and notarized. "If my family turns against Claire for doing what I asked her to, know that she has my full blessing, and the truth will be in the ledger." I frowned. The ledger? I looked back inside the envelope, and there it was, a small brass key. And in that moment, I realized Grandma wasn't just protecting her money. She was protecting a secret. And whatever it was, I was about to find it. The brass key was small, old-fashioned, almost decorative. It looked like something that might open a jewelry box or an antique drawer, not a safe full of secrets. But the note in my grandmother's handwriting was clear. "The truth will be in the ledger." I turned the key over in my hand that night until my fingers went numb. Ledger. She didn't say journal, or box, or safe. She said ledger, which meant records, accounts, transactions. My grandparents had always kept immaculate financial records. My grandfather had been almost obsessive about it. Rows of numbers, itemized expenses, investments, property deeds. But when I'd helped my grandmother sort through paperwork after his death, those ledgers had been missing. I assumed she'd thrown them out. Apparently, she hadn't. I called Daniel first thing the next morning. "I found a key," I told him, my voice low. "Grandma said the truth is in the ledger. Does that ring any bells legally?" He paused. "If she wrote that intentionally, it might refer to a financial record or property documentation that proves ownership or wrongdoing." "You think she meant hidden money?" He exhaled. "Or hidden transactions. Maybe something your father and uncles didn't want you to find." The thought made my stomach twist. I spent the entire day searching. I tore through every cabinet in her old house, every storage box in the attic, every drawer in the basement. Dust coated my fingers, my hair clung to sweat, and my legs ached from crouching and climbing. Nothing. But just as I was about to give up, I remembered something. When I was a teenager, Grandpa once told me, "The most important things aren't always where you think they'd be. They're where people stop looking." I walked into his old study, which had been locked since his passing. The key was gone years ago, but the door frame was old wood. I could jiggle it open with a flat screwdriver. Inside, the air was stale and still, smelling faintly of tobacco and lemon polish. The bookshelves were lined with decades of law books, ledgers, and real estate manuals. But one section caught my eye, a row of antique encyclopedias, thick and identical. Only one of them looked newer, its spine glossier, its title slightly off-center. I pulled it out. It wasn't a book.
It was a hollow shell.
Inside was a small, fireproof lockbox. And when I tried the brass key, it fit perfectly. My hands were shaking as I turned it. The latch clicked. Inside were two things, a navy blue leather ledger and a thin stack of old letters tied with twine. I opened the ledger first. The pages were filled with my grandfather's meticulous handwriting, dates, transactions, bank codes. But as I flipped through, my heart started to race. Because these weren't just ordinary records. They were payments. Regular, monthly deposits labeled under fake company names. Some went back 30 years. MRL Holdings, $5,000 transfer. Eastbrook Agency, $7,200 transfer. And beneath one of the last entries, a note scrawled in my grandmother's hand. Robert knows. Keep quiet until safe. Robert. My father. My palms went cold. What did he know? I opened the letters next. The first one was addressed to my grandfather from a man named Henry Tate, postmarked 1994. Harold, I've made the deposits as we discussed. The property sale under MRL Holdings is final. I've kept the names clean. If this ever comes to light, it'll look like standard real estate movement. HT. Another letter followed, dated a few years later. June, I know Harold meant well, but hiding assets this way can't go on forever. If the boys ever find out where the money truly came from, they'll destroy everything he built. I stared at the handwriting, my heart pounding louder with every word. Where the money truly came from. My grandfather's fortune. Those millions my father and uncles were fighting over. Wasn't what it seemed. I grabbed my phone and called Daniel again. You're not going to believe this, I said, voice trembling. I found the ledger. There are coded transfers, fake companies, years of it, and letters. Someone named Henry Tate helped them hide money. There was a pause. Henry Tate, he repeated. That name sounds familiar. Wait, yes. He was under federal investigation in the early 2000s. Money laundering through shell corporations. My heart dropped. So you're saying... I'm saying your grandfather's estate wasn't just real estate profits, Claire. Some of that money was probably dirty, laundered through fake property transactions. I pressed a hand to my forehead. Oh my God. It doesn't mean he was part of it knowingly, Daniel said. But if your father found out, he'd want it buried, I finished. And suddenly everything made sense. My father's obsession with the estate, his desperation to handle things himself, his rage when the trust locked him out. He wasn't just trying to take money. He was trying to keep a secret from surfacing. That night, I sat on the floor of my apartment surrounded by the open ledger and letters. The city hummed outside my window, but inside, everything felt quiet and heavy. I thought about my grandfather, the man who taught me about honesty and hard work. Could he really have been laundering money? Or was he just covering someone else's mistakes? I flipped back to the first few pages, tracing the faded ink with my finger. That's when I noticed something faintly indented into the paper, numbers pressed so hard they'd left a mark. 196-84-371. It read. A social security number. But not my grandfather's. I typed it into a public records search database Daniel had shown me once. When the result popped up, I froze. Henry Tate, deceased. He died 6 years ago. And he had no recorded relatives. No known business filings still active. But there was one odd note in the archive, a sealed safety deposit box and his name still registered at a local credit union. My pulse quickened. I knew what I had to do. The next morning, I drove to Hartford Mutual Credit Union, clutching the ledger and letters in my bag. When I reached the front desk, I asked to speak to a manager. A middle-aged woman with kind eyes appeared. Can I help you? I told her I was handling the estate affairs of Harold Morrison and believed I might have information related to an account belonging to Henry Tate. She frowned. That's an old one. We can't release private box contents without proof of relationship or court order. I nodded, sliding one of the letters across the desk. Then maybe this will help. It's addressed from Henry Tate to my grandparents. He specifically references joint business transactions tied to his account. She read silently, eyebrows rising. Wait here. 10 minutes later, she returned with a small gray metal box. This was due for disposal, she said quietly. No one's claimed it since his death, but the name, Harold Morrison, is listed as secondary contact. I'll need to log that you're reviewing it. I signed the paperwork with trembling hands. When she opened the box, there were only two things inside, a flash drive and an envelope. The envelope contained more letters, most faded beyond reading, and one single photo. It showed my grandfather standing beside Henry Tate in front of a construction site, shaking hands. Behind them, a banner. Morrison and Tate Developments, 1987. So they were business partners. I plugged the flash drive into my laptop later that night, praying it still worked. And it did. Inside was a folder labeled Project ESTBROK. My breath caught as the files loaded. Dozens of scanned documents, bank transfers, offshore accounts, real estate titles. Each one marked with initials, HM and HD. They'd hidden millions overseas. Not to evade taxes. Not for greed. But to protect something or someone. At the bottom of the last document was a note written in my grandmother's handwriting. For Claire, if she ever needs to understand. We didn't steal. We protected what they couldn't. One day, the right person will ask why. I sat there staring at the screen, tears running down my face. For the first time, I realized what my grandparents had been doing. They weren't criminals. They were guardians. That dirty money wasn't stolen. It had been siphoned from corrupt development projects back in the 1980s, when my grandfather discovered city officials were taking bribes and displacing families from low-income housing. He'd worked with Tate, a whistleblower accountant, to move the funds out before they could be misused. My father must have learned about it years later and decided to reclaim it, not to fix the past, but to profit from it. Grandma had known, and she'd made sure the truth wouldn't die with her. I called Daniel again, this time with shaky relief. "You're not going to believe this," I said, laughing through tears. "The money, it wasn't criminal. It was protection money. Grandpa saved it from being stolen by city officials. He used fake companies to hide it until it could be returned legally." Daniel whistled softly. "So that's the real legacy." "Yes," I said. "And now I have proof."
He paused.
"Claire, if this comes out, your father's case isn't just over. His reputation could implode." I exhaled. He made his choice. For the first time in months, I felt calm. The truth was no longer buried. But as I closed the ledger, a part of me knew the fight wasn't truly over. Because my father hadn't given up. And once he realized I had what he wanted, the documents that could destroy or redeem the Morrison name, he'd come for them. And when he did, I would be ready. The day I found the truth, I thought I'd finally be able to breathe again. But instead, the air around me grew heavier. Because some truths don't bring peace, they bring consequences. I hadn't told anyone yet, not even Daniel, where I'd hidden the ledger or the flash drive. Something inside me said I needed to hold it close until I was ready. I scanned every document, stored copies in 3 different encrypted drives, and left the originals in a small safety box under my bed. For 2 days, my apartment stayed quiet. Too quiet. And then the knocking started. It was a slow, deliberate knock. 3 times. A pause. Then again. I froze where I was, coffee mug halfway to my lips. It was almost 9 p.m. I walked to the door, heart thudding. Through the peephole, I saw him, my father. He stood in the hallway in a dark coat, his hair slightly disheveled, eyes sunken. He looked tired, older somehow. But his jaw was set in that same determined line I'd known my whole life. "Claire," he called quietly. "Open the door. We need to talk." I hesitated. Everything in me screamed, "Don't." But part of me, the daughter part, the one that had always wanted to fix things, wanted to believe maybe, just maybe, he'd come to make peace. I unlocked the chain and opened the door a few inches. "Dad." He gave a tight smile. "Can I come in?" I didn't answer, but he pushed gently, and before I knew it, he was inside. He looked around, the neat kitchen, the faint smell of lavender from my candle, the stack of folders on the counter. "You've been busy." "I've had to be," I said softly. He turned back to me, eyes sharp now. "I know you found something." My stomach dropped. "What are you talking about?" He stepped closer. "Don't do that, Claire. Don't play games. You've been digging through your grandmother's things. You found the ledger, didn't you?" I swallowed hard. "I don't know what you mean." He laughed, low and bitter. "You sound just like her. Always pretending you don't see what's right in front of you." "Maybe you're the one pretending," I said quietly. "Pretending you didn't know what Grandpa really did." That made him pause. His face hardened. "You think you know the truth? You think those papers tell the whole story?" "I think they tell enough," I said. "They prove he wasn't the criminal you made him sound like." He tilted his head. "Criminal?"
No. Coward, maybe. The words hit like a slap.
"What did you just say?" He started pacing, voice rising. "You think Harold Morrison was a hero? He wasn't. He didn't save that money for some noble cause, he hid it because he couldn't face what he'd done." I frowned. "What are you talking about?" He turned sharply, eyes blazing. "Your grandfather wasn't protecting anyone. He stole money from his own business partner, from Henry Tate. That's what those fake companies were about. He funneled assets away under Tate's name so he could keep control. When Tate found out, he threatened to expose him." My breath caught. "That's not true." "Oh, but it is," he said. "And when Tate died, your grandfather buried the evidence and told everyone it was some noble mission. He lied to your grandmother, he lied to me, and now you're continuing the lie." I shook my head, tears burning behind my eyes. "You're twisting everything." I saw the letters. Tate trusted him. They were working together. "Together," he spat. "You mean Harold used him, just like he used everyone. And you're too naive to see it." He was lying. I could see it in his eyes, the flicker, the way he couldn't hold my gaze when he said it. But beneath the anger, I saw something else. Fear. That's when it hit me. He wasn't trying to convince me my grandfather was guilty. He was trying to convince himself that what he'd done to cover it up was justified. "Dad," I said quietly, "what are you so afraid of me finding?"
He stopped pacing.
His jaw clenched. "Did you know Henry Tate kept copies of the accounts?" I asked softly. "Did you know Grandma hid them?" "I found everything, the real transactions, the offshore accounts, even the photo of them together. They weren't stealing, Dad. They were hiding evidence of city corruption. Grandpa was trying to protect people who would have lost everything." He stared at me, speechless. And then his voice dropped. "You don't understand. That money, it was meant to fix what he broke. It was supposed to come back to us." "Back to you," I said. "Or to your bank account." His face flushed red. "Watch your tone." "I've spent my whole life watching my tone around you," I snapped. "Not anymore." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. He took a slow step toward me. "You don't know what you're dealing with, Claire. That money doesn't just belong to us. There are other people involved. Dangerous people. You don't want to end up in the middle of this." I stared at him, heart pounding. "Then why didn't you walk away when you had the chance?" He didn't answer. Instead, his gaze drifted to the counter, the pile of documents I hadn't put away yet. The corner of the ledger was visible beneath a stack of folders. His entire expression changed. He moved fast. Before I could react, he lunged toward the counter. I darted forward, grabbing the ledger, but he was stronger. We struggled, papers flying, his hand gripping my wrist so hard it hurt. "Give it to me," he shouted. "No." He yanked again, and I stumbled backward, hitting the edge of the table. The pain shot through my side, but I held onto the ledger like my life depended on it. "Dad, stop," I cried. "You're proving everything I already knew." He froze for a second, panting, sweat beading on his forehead. Then his eyes softened, and his voice dropped to a whisper. Claire, please. I'm trying to protect you. By breaking into my house? By lying? By keeping you out of something that can destroy you, he said, voice trembling now. You think this is about inheritance? About greed? It's bigger than that. The money, some of it doesn't belong to us. The people behind those accounts, if they find out it's in your trust, they'll come after you. I stared at him, confused and terrified all at once. What are you talking about? He ran a hand through his hair. There were government officials, contractors, people who used those shell companies for years. Harold covered for them, maybe even out of guilt. But when Tate died, those funds froze. They've been dormant, hidden in offshore holdings ever since. And when your grandmother passed, the trail led back here. My mind raced. So they think we have their money. He nodded slowly. They think you do. My breath hitched. How do they even know my name? Because, he said, voice low, they were watching. The room went silent except for the faint hum of my refrigerator. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something I hadn't before. Fear. Not just guilt. Real, bone-deep fear. Dad. I whispered. What did you do? He didn't answer. He just turned toward the door. I'll fix it, he said. I'll talk to them. But you need to destroy that ledger. Tonight. And then he left. That night, I sat alone on the floor with the ledger open in front of me. The moonlight stretched across the pages, the ink shining faintly, like veins on skin. Could it be true? Could my grandfather have been tied up in something far deeper than I'd imagined? I thought about the letters, the flash drive, the hidden accounts, and my father's eyes when he said they're watching. I picked up my phone and called Daniel. He answered on the second ring. You okay? He asked immediately. I think I'm in danger, I said, voice shaking. My father came here. He knows about the ledger. And he said there are people, government-connected people, who want the money back. There was a long pause. Where's the ledger now? With me. Good. Keep it somewhere safe. I'll contact a federal financial crimes officer I know. If what your father said is true, we need to report it before it escalates. Report it, I said. That could expose my family. He sighed. Claire, you can't protect everyone. Not this time. I hung up a few minutes later, staring at the ledger. I thought about my grandmother's voice the last time we spoke, the way she'd said, "You're the only one who listens." If I destroyed it, I'd erase the truth she died protecting. But if I kept it, I might be putting myself in danger. Either way, I'd already crossed the line. I decided then I wasn't going to hide anymore. The next morning, I packed the ledger, the flash drive, and the letters into a sealed envelope and drove straight to Daniel's office downtown. When I got there, he wasn't alone. Sitting across from his desk was a woman in a dark navy suit, early 40s, calm, composed. She stood when I entered. Claire Morrison, she said, extending a hand. I'm Agent Reynolds with the Department of Financial Crimes. I believe you have something that belongs to the United States government. Agent Reynolds' handshake was firm, professional, and disarmingly calm. The kind of composure that made you feel like she already knew everything before you even sat down. Her eyes flicked to the sealed envelope in my hand. That must be it, she said softly. Daniel cleared his throat. Before we go any further, I need to know under what authority you're here, Agent. She smiled politely, but didn't sit down. Fair question. I'm with the Department of Financial Crimes and Asset Recovery. We've been monitoring dormant accounts connected to a defunct shell corporation called MREL Holdings. I believe that name appears in the documents Ms. Morrison has in her possession. I swallowed. How do you know about that? Because Ms. Morrison, she said, lowering her voice, we've been looking for them for over 20 years. She gestured toward the envelope. May I? I hesitated, then placed it on the desk. She slipped on latex gloves and carefully opened it, pulling out the navy blue ledger, the old letters, and the flash drive. She flipped through a few pages, scanning the handwriting with intense focus. These are original, she murmured. Unbelievable. We thought everything was destroyed in the Tate files purge. Daniel leaned forward. You're saying this ledger proves something criminal? She looked up, eyes sharp. Or something heroic. Depends on your point of view. My breath caught. What does that mean? Agent Reynolds turned a page, then looked at me. Your grandfather and Henry Tate were both listed as informants in an internal corruption case involving real estate developers and state officials back in the late 1980s. The project name was Eastbrook. I froze. Project Eastbrook. She nodded. The government was funneling funds into redevelopment zones under fake charities. Millions in taxpayer money disappeared. Tate and your grandfather were the ones who discovered it, and instead of turning it over immediately, they created shell accounts to secure the money and track the corruption trail. So he wasn't stealing? I whispered.
No.
He was safeguarding evidence. Daniel's eyes widened. But that would make him a federal witness. Reynolds nodded slowly.
He was.
Until Tate died. After that, the investigation collapsed. Harold Morrison disappeared from the records, and the money remained frozen. Every few years, someone tries to access it. We've flagged multiple attempts. Most recently, under the name Robert Morrison. My father. I felt my blood run cold. Agent Reynolds closed the ledger gently. Your father has been on our radar since he first petitioned for access to the Morrison estate 6 months ago. He used legal filings to disguise retrieval requests from the offshore accounts. When those failed, he attempted to liquidate estate property instead. You creating that trust stopped him. My voice cracked. So he knew exactly what he was doing. Yes, she said evenly. And likely who he was doing it for. Daniel frowned. Meaning? She looked between us. Some of the people involved in the original corruption case are still alive. They're wealthy, powerful, and deeply invested in making sure this money stays buried. If your father promised them access and failed, they'll be coming for him, and you. The room fell silent. I felt my pulse hammering in my ears. So what happens now? Reynolds straightened. I need you to officially turn over the ledger and all related materials as evidence. We'll open a sealed investigation. You'll be protected as a cooperating witness. Daniel glanced at me. Claire, this is the safest route.
Safe.
That word didn't mean what it used to. What about my family? I asked quietly. If this comes out, they'll be ruined. Reynolds met my eyes. Your family made choices, Ms. Morrison. You made a different one. This investigation doesn't destroy families. It exposes truth. Her words hung heavy between us. Finally, I nodded. Okay, I'll cooperate. She smiled slightly. Good. I'll arrange protective documentation and transport. We'll keep your location confidential while we process the evidence. When she left, Daniel closed the office door and turned to me. You did the right thing, he said softly. But this isn't over yet. I laughed shakily. That's becoming the theme of my life. For the next few days, everything moved fast. Reynolds' team scanned and logged the ledger, verified Tate's signatures, and compared transaction records with old federal databases. I was debriefed multiple times, dates, memories, every conversation I could recall with my grandparents. They treated me gently, but the weight of it all pressed down like an anchor. At night, I'd lie awake replaying my grandmother's words. Do what needs to be done. Maybe she'd known this moment would come. But beneath the exhaustion, there was relief. Finally, the truth was in the open. Until the call came. It was Daniel, his voice tight. Claire, are you home right now?
Yes. Why?
Don't go anywhere. The FBI just intercepted a data breach attempt on the trust server. My stomach twisted. From who? They're still tracing it, but... A loud crash echoed outside my apartment window. My heart stopped. Daniel, I whispered, someone's here. I peeked through the blinds. A dark sedan idled near the curb, engine running. 2 men in black jackets stepped out, their faces obscured. Claire, listen to me, Daniel said urgently. Get your bag and leave now. Go out the back entrance. I'm calling Agent Reynolds. I grabbed my keys, my wallet, and ran barefoot through the back hallway. My pulse pounded so hard it drowned out everything, even the sound of footsteps behind me. I ducked into the parking garage and slid into my car, locking the doors. My hands shook as I turned the key. For a terrifying moment, the engine wouldn't start. Then it roared to life. I sped out, heart hammering, headlights slicing through the night. Behind me, the sedan's lights flared to life. They were following. I took a hard left, then another, weaving through the quiet downtown streets until I saw the bright glow of a 24-hour diner. I pulled in fast, parked crookedly, and ran inside. The waitress at the counter looked startled. "Honey, you okay?" I nodded, breathless. Just coffee, please." I took the booth farthest from the window and watched as the sedan cruised past slowly, then disappeared. My phone buzzed. It was Agent Reynolds. "Ms. Morrison, this is Reynolds. Stay where you are. We have a team en route." They were outside my apartment, I said, voice trembling. 2 men. They followed me. "You did the right thing leaving. Don't move." I hung up and pressed my palms together, forcing myself to breathe. 20 minutes later, Reynolds and another agent walked into the diner. She scanned the room, spotted me, and approached quickly. "You're safe now," she said firmly. "We traced the sedan. Fake plates. Likely connected to one of the firms your father worked with." "My father sent them?" She hesitated. "We don't have proof yet, but they knew where you lived." Daniel arrived shortly after, pale and furious. "This has gone too far." Reynolds nodded. "We'll move Claire to a secure location until we conclude the audit. The ledger evidence is being processed, and preliminary results already show government-level fraud stretching back decades." I rubbed my temples. "So, this isn't just about my family anymore." "No," she said softly. "It's about power. Your grandparents were trying to stop it. Your father tried to profit from it. And now you're the one holding the proof." By the next morning, I was relocated to a small federal safe house outside New Haven, quiet, nondescript, with 2 security guards stationed discreetly nearby. For the first time in weeks, I felt a strange, uneasy calm. But that night, around midnight, my phone buzzed again. A new message. From an unknown number. It was a photo, blurry, taken in low light, of my father sitting alone in a motel parking lot. His face looked hollow, defeated. And below it, one line of text. "He wants to see you. One last time." I stared at it for what felt like forever. My hands trembled, but I knew deep down what this meant. He'd lost. He had nowhere left to run. And maybe, despite everything, I owed him a chance to tell me the truth. I didn't tell Reynolds where I was going. I just left before dawn, driving through the fog until I reached the old highway motel near Hartford. He was there, sitting on the curb, a cigarette between his fingers. When he saw me, he smiled faintly, sadly. "You shouldn't have come," he said quietly. "I had to." He nodded, staring at the ground. "They're done with me, you know. The people who wanted that money. I failed them." "You could have stopped all this," I said. "You could have told the truth." He laughed bitterly. "Truth doesn't feed you, Claire. It doesn't fix the years you watched your parents fight over bills while your grandfather hoarded millions. You don't understand what it feels like to be cut out." I knelt down beside him. "I understand disappointment, but not at the cost of your soul." He exhaled, smoke curling in the cold air. "You're stronger than I thought." For the first time, I didn't feel fear or anger. Just sadness. "I wanted you to be proud of me," I said softly. He looked up, eyes glistening. "I am. You did what I couldn't." We sat in silence for a moment before he reached into his coat pocket. My breath caught, but instead of a weapon, he pulled out a folded piece of paper. He handed it to me. "Read it when I'm gone," he said. And then he walked away into the mist. I unfolded the paper later that night. It was a handwritten note, shaky, desperate, but honest. "Claire, I knew about the ledger long before you did. I wanted to control it because I was scared, not of losing money, but of losing what little power I had left in this family. Your grandfather wasn't perfect, but he was right. Money makes people louder. About who they really are. You're not like us. Don't let it poison you. Dad." I read it 3 times, then folded it carefully and tucked it into the ledger's final page before turning it over to Agent Reynolds the next morning. It was done. The trust remained intact. The money stayed protected. The investigation expanded into one of the biggest state corruption cases in decades. And for the first time since my grandmother's funeral, I finally felt free. The courtroom smelled faintly of old paper, disinfectant, and anticipation. That strange, sterile blend that only exists in places where lives are about to change. I sat at the witness table, palms sweating, heart pounding so hard I could feel it echo through my ribs. Across the aisle sat my father, thinner now, his shoulders hunched, his once steady hands trembling slightly as he adjusted his glasses.
He wouldn't look at me.
Agent Reynolds sat behind the prosecution table, a small nod of reassurance catching my eye. To her right, Daniel was reviewing the documents I'd handed over. The ledger, the letters, the flash drive. The same evidence that had set everything in motion. The judge entered, and everyone rose. My legs felt heavy, as if my body knew what my mind hadn't yet accepted, that this wasn't just a trial about money. It was a reckoning. The prosecutor began by outlining the timeline. My grandfather's whistleblowing. The hidden accounts. The misuse of government funds by powerful developers. My father's attempts to reclaim and redistribute the money through illicit channels. Then it was my turn. When I stood, my voice barely rose above a whisper at first. My name is Claire Morrison. I was the trustee of the Morrison Family Preservation Trust, created 20 months ago at my grandmother's request. The lawyer guided me gently. Can you tell the court why you created the trust? I nodded. Because I knew my grandmother's wishes weren't safe. My father and uncles were trying to access her estate. She told me she trusted me to protect what she and my grandfather had built. I didn't realize then that what I was protecting was much bigger than an inheritance. He gestured toward the exhibits. You found the ledger and letters? Yes. And what did they contain? I took a deep breath. Proof that my grandparents weren't thieves. They were hiding funds that exposed government corruption tied to housing development. They were afraid if they turned it over too soon it would disappear, or worse, they would. The courtroom was silent except for the faint scratch of pens and the echo of my words. And your father? The prosecutor asked. My throat tightened. He knew about the money. He thought he could reclaim it for himself, maybe even sell access to the offshore accounts to people who had a stake in the old cover-up. I think he convinced himself it was about justice, but it wasn't. Was your father aware that the government had begun investigating the accounts again? I hesitated, glancing at him.
Yes.
He knew. That's why he came to me. He wanted the ledger before they did. The lawyer nodded and stepped back. Thank you, Ms. Morrison. As I turned to sit, my father's lawyer rose for cross-examination. Ms. Morrison, he began, voice smooth but sharp, you've made serious accusations about your father. Would you say you have a personal bias against him? I met his gaze. I have a personal history with him, yes, but not bias. I loved my father. I wanted to believe he'd do the right thing. He smirked faintly. And yet you recorded conversations with him and turned them over to federal agents? I didn't record them to hurt him, I said softly. I did it because I was afraid. Afraid he'd expose family secrets? No, I said louder now. Afraid he'd get himself killed trying to hide them. A ripple moved through the courtroom. Even the judge paused. The lawyer shifted, clearly caught off guard. No further questions. I sat down, my hands trembling. Daniel leaned closer, whispering, You did great. But all I felt was sadness. Because the man sitting across from me wasn't the father I remembered from childhood, the one who'd lifted me onto his shoulders at county fairs, who told me that family meant everything. That version of him had vanished long before today. After court adjourned for the day, I walked outside into the crisp Connecticut air. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters shouting questions. Agent Reynolds guided me through the chaos toward an unmarked car waiting at the curb. Claire, she said quietly as we got in, you were brave in there. What you did today set a precedent. Without your testimony, this case would have stayed buried like so many others. I looked out the window. It doesn't feel like bravery. It feels like losing everything to tell the truth. She gave a small smile. That's usually how the truth works. The next few weeks were a blur. The federal case expanded. Dozens of names surfaced: politicians, developers, executives. The Morrison estate became the centerpiece of a massive financial investigation spanning 3 decades. The news called it the Eastbrook Scandal Revival. For the first time, people spoke my grandfather's name not as a criminal or a recluse, but as a man who tried to do the right thing and paid dearly for it. As for my father, he took a plea deal. Accessory to financial fraud, obstruction of justice, and witness intimidation. 5 years in a minimum security facility. I went to see him before sentencing. The visiting room smelled faintly of coffee and bleach. The air buzzed with the low hum of vending machines. When he walked in, wearing a beige jumpsuit, my breath caught. He looked smaller, not just physically but emotionally, like the world had finally stripped him of every layer he'd used to hide behind. He sat down across from me. "You didn't have to come." "I did," I said quietly. He nodded, picking at a crack in the table surface. "I saw the papers. They're calling your grandfather a hero now." "He deserves that," I said. "He did what he could to protect people." My father gave a dry laugh. "And what about me? What do I deserve?" I hesitated. "A chance to be better when you get out." He looked up at me for the first time. "You sound like your grandmother." I smiled faintly. She'd like to hear that. We sat in silence for a while. There was nothing left to say, and yet, somehow, that silence felt like closure. When I stood to leave, he said softly, "Claire, thank you for keeping the truth safe." I turned back, tears welling in my eyes. "It wasn't just about truth, Dad. It was about us. About breaking the cycle." He nodded, eyes wet. "Maybe you did." After his sentencing, I took a few months off work. I spent time cleaning out my grandmother's house, which the trust had legally preserved until the case concluded. It was quiet there, the kind of silence that didn't hurt anymore. The sunroom still smelled faintly of her rose lotion. Her reading glasses were on the table beside her favorite book, a small folded napkin marking her last page. I found myself sitting in her old wicker chair, looking out at the garden she'd tended so carefully. I thought about everything that had happened, the lies, the lawsuits, the nights I'd spent terrified that I'd made the wrong choice. And yet, sitting there, I finally felt at peace. Because even though the family I grew up with had shattered, something new had taken its place. Honesty. That's what my grandmother wanted all along. One afternoon, I got a call from Agent Reynolds. "The investigation's officially closed," she said. "All funds have been reallocated through the trust you created. The Morrison Family Preservation Trust will now support low-income housing initiatives, just as your grandfather intended when he first diverted the money." I smiled, tears stinging my eyes. "That's perfect."
"There's one more thing," she said.
"We found an unclaimed property title in your grandfather's name. It's a small cabin near Litchfield. He left it in your name through an amendment filed years ago. Looks like he wanted you to have it." I laughed softly. He always did love surprises. A week later, I drove out to the cabin. It sat near the edge of a quiet lake, surrounded by tall pines. The wood was aged but sturdy, the porch overlooking still water that reflected the late afternoon sun like glass. Inside, the air smelled of cedar and old books. Dust floated in golden shafts of light. And on the mantel above the fireplace sat a framed photo, my grandparents, smiling in their garden, their hands clasped. Beneath it, a note in my grandmother's handwriting. "For Claire, you found the truth. Now find peace." I sank to my knees, tears spilling freely. For the first time since all of it began, I felt her presence, not in grief, but in calm. Like she was telling me it was finally over. That night, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the sun disappear behind the trees. The lake turned from gold to indigo. Crickets sang. The air was cool and full of life. I thought about my grandfather's favorite saying, "Money doesn't change people, Claire. It just makes them louder about who they already are." He'd been right. Money had made my family loud, vicious, desperate. But it had made me something else, quieter, stronger, more certain of what truly mattered. I picked up my journal and began to write. Not about betrayal, not about anger, but about legacy, the kind that isn't measured in dollars, but in courage. When I finished, I closed the book, leaned back, and whispered into the night.
Thank you, Grandma. You can rest now.
We're okay. The following spring felt different, softer somehow, lighter, like the world itself had unclenched. By April, headlines about the Morrison case had faded from the front page, replaced by new scandals and stories. The Eastbrook investigation ended in a wave of indictments: 3 developers, 2 former state officials, and 1 retired banker. None of them had expected the truth to rise from a dusty old ledger kept hidden in a family home. But for me, life had finally slowed to something almost ordinary. I'd moved permanently into the small cabin near Litchfield. I spent mornings on the porch, laptop balanced on my knees, working remotely for a nonprofit that partnered with affordable housing programs, the very cause my grandparents had once tried to protect in secret. The irony never left me. The same money that nearly tore my family apart was now funding homes for families who needed them most. Sometimes, I drive into town and stop by the construction sites funded through the Morrison Trust. There were no plaques with our names, no marble dedications. Just new windows, clean sidewalks, children riding bikes. That was enough. I could almost hear Grandpa saying, "Keep it quiet, keep it good." One morning, as I reviewed grant applications, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. "Ms. Morrison," a voice asked. "This is Warden Lewis from Ridgefield Correctional. Your father requested a video visit. He's eligible this week if you'd like to accept." I froze. It had been nearly a year since the sentencing. I hadn't spoken to him once. "Yeah," I said softly. "Schedule it." That night, I sat in front of my laptop, the cabin dark except for the soft glow of the screen. The connection flickered, then steadied. He appeared thinner still, hair gray at the edges, but his eyes clearer than I remembered. "Hey, kiddo," he said. I smiled faintly. "You're not supposed to call me that anymore." He chuckled. "Old habits." We talked awkwardly at first. Small talk about weather, about how the food was better than he'd expected, about how reading helped the days go by. But then the conversation turned quieter. "I heard what you've been doing," he said. "All those houses being built under the trust. You really did it." "It's what Grandma wanted." He nodded. "And what your grandfather would have wanted too." He hesitated, then added, "I think about him a lot. About how angry I was when he left everything to your conscience instead of mine." "He trusted you once," I said. "I know. And I broke that." He looked down. "I don't expect forgiveness, Claire. I just wanted you to know I'm proud of you." The words hit harder than I expected. My throat tightened. "I forgive you," I said quietly. He looked up sharply. "You shouldn't." "I already did," I replied. "Because carrying hate feels heavier than any trust fund ever could." He exhaled slowly, eyes glassy. "You sound like your mother when she left me." "Maybe I got her strength," I said with a small smile. The call ended, and the screen went black. I sat there for a long time, staring at my reflection, feeling the last thread of bitterness untangle inside me. That summer, I was invited to speak at a state ethics conference. Daniel had submitted my story under the topic, "Whistleblowing Within Families, Protecting Integrity Across Generations." Standing at the podium, looking out at rows of faces, I felt my knees tremble the same way they had in the courtroom. But this time, the fear was different. It wasn't about losing something, it was about honoring something. My grandparents, I began, believed that silence could sometimes protect. I used to think that meant staying quiet to avoid conflict. But I've learned that real protection comes from honesty, even when it hurts. The Morrison Trust was never about money. It was about keeping promises. I told them everything, not every detail of the pain, but the lessons. That transparency matters, that family doesn't excuse corruption, that love can survive even betrayal if you choose to rebuild instead of revenge. When I finished, the audience stood and applauded. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like the girl defending herself against whispers. I felt like someone who had finally earned her voice. A few weeks later, I drove back to Hartford to visit my grandmother's grave. The cemetery was quiet except for the sound of leaves rustling in the summer wind. Her headstone was simple, just June Morrison, beloved wife and grandmother. I knelt down, brushed away a few fallen petals, and placed a small envelope at the base. Inside was a photo of the first family who'd moved into a new house built under the trust, a single mother with 2 little boys, all smiling wide on their porch. "They moved in last week," I whispered. "You'd love them." The sun dipped lower, bathing everything in gold. I felt something like warmth pass through me, peace, maybe, or closure. By autumn, the cabin had become home in every sense. I planted roses outside the porch, just like Grandma's. I even bought an old phonograph at a flea market to play her favorite jazz records. One evening, as I was cooking dinner, I heard a knock on the door. Not sharp or threatening this time, gentle. When I opened it, Daniel stood there, holding a bottle of red wine and a grin. "You're impossible to reach," he said. "I figured I'd drive up and make sure you still exist." I laughed. "Barely. Come in." We ate by the fire, the soft crackle of logs filling the silences between us. He told me he'd taken a position with the Department of Housing, helping oversee ethical compliance for redevelopment grants. "So technically," he said, smiling, "you're my inspiration." "That's terrifying," I joked. After dinner, we stepped outside. The lake shimmered beneath the moonlight, still and perfect. "You ever think about what's next?" he asked. "I used to," I said. "Now I just think about today." He nodded slowly. "Maybe that's what healing looks like." For a long time, neither of us spoke. The night was calm, the stars sharp and endless. And for once, I didn't feel the need to fill the silence. Winter came early that year. Snow blanketed the cabin roof, and the roses slept under frost. I spent Christmas alone, by choice, baking cookies with Grandma's recipe and playing her old records. Sometime near midnight, I opened my journal, the same one I'd started the night I found the cabin, and wrote. It's strange how quiet redemption sounds. No thunder, no applause, just the soft hum of a heater, the rustle of pine trees, and the steady beat of a heart that finally forgives itself. In February, I received a letter from the warden again. My father had been transferred to a work release program for good behavior. At the bottom of the note was a small, unexpected addition. He asked that we forward you this envelope. Inside was a single Polaroid photo, my father standing beside a half-built wooden frame at a community service site, hammer in hand, a small smile tugging at his face. On the back, in his handwriting, building something honest this time. I pressed the photo to my chest, tears welling, but they were gentle tears, the kind that cleanse rather than sting. By spring, the Morrison Trust had completed its 10th housing development. Local newspapers covered the story quietly, respectfully, calling it a legacy of repair. I visited one of the sites, a cul-de-sac of modest townhomes surrounded by young trees. Children played in the street. A woman waved at me from her porch, calling, "Thank you, Ms. Morrison." I waved back, smiling. "Thank my grandparents," I said. As I walked back to my car, I caught my reflection in a window. Older, calmer, stronger. For the first time in my life, I recognized the woman looking back. That night, I returned to the cabin and took the old ledger from my drawer. It was weathered now, its pages faintly yellowed. Across the first page, in my grandfather's handwriting, the words, "For whoever finds this, do what's right, even when it costs you." I picked up a pen and added beneath it,
Done.
Claire Morrison, trustee. Then I closed the book, slid it into a wooden box, and placed it beneath the floorboard under the hearth. Not to hide it, but to let it rest. Years from now, maybe someone will find it. Maybe they'll wonder who Claire Morrison was, why she cared so much about old papers and dusty names. Maybe they'll never know. But they'll see the houses, the schools, the gardens built because of one act of trust, and they'll understand that truth, once freed, doesn't need fame to survive. It just needs someone brave enough to carry it. I stepped outside one last time before bed. The air was cold, crisp, and clean. The stars stretched endlessly above the dark lake. Somewhere in that silence, I could almost hear my grandmother's laugh, my grandfather's voice, and the echo of a family finally at peace. I whispered into the wind, "We did it." And for the first time in my life, I truly believed it.